This is our second quail plan, which obviously tells you a little bit about the momentum of the first quail plan. We did fall on some hard times in those days. In fact, we had a quail plan one day, and the next day we really didn't have a quail plan. And so we did learn some lessons from that. And if you do not have the support of your board for the long term, you're in trouble. Whatever you do when you're selling your quail plan and talking to your board of directors and helping them understand what the long-term nature of this problem is. And, you know, initially momentum might be about charisma and excitement, but that wears off. That wears off. And what you're left with is guts and perseverance. And I think that in the long haul, this is what matters the most, is being able to persevere. I've told folks that this quail fight is a gut check. It's just a long, grinding campaign to chip away at it. Folks, you know, they act like sometimes deer populations came back overnight, or turkey populations came back overnight, or waterfowl. They have come back, but it took 75 years of sustained effort to make that happen. And there's no reason that it shouldn't take that long. Why would anyone think it would be easier than that with quail? Real quickly about our quail plan and how it's structured. There's 3 basic layers to our quail plan. And the number 1 layer is our 5 private lands wildlife biologists that Bob mentioned. The second layer is increased and targeted cost share. And the third layer is something we call QMAP, which is the Quail Management Assistance Program. That's the part of our quail program, something for everyone. We had to have something for everyone. And I did not know what that was when I inserted it into this talk the first time. I just needed something with a lot of candles. But what I was trying to illustrate there is how long it might take. This is not a 2 or 3 year fix. We were very careful when we were talking about our quail plan to say what it was not. We didn't want to give anyone false expectations. So we were very clear in stating that we do not expect to restore quail statewide. There are simply places in the state where they're probably not restorable. Not a cash cow, we don't come out to the landowner's property and do it for them. Not a quick fix. Again, I hit on this message of sustained effort enough. What we hope to do is restore quail across 6 focus areas. We have not done that. We hope to do it. We have definitely increased technical assistance and cost share program delivery. We hope to be able to demonstrate county scale population effects. I think there are very few examples of county-wide population quail recovery. I know Missouri had a couple of examples, and now we're waiting to see some more. But it's like a giant flywheel. Once you get it going, you can let it rest for a little while, but if you take your eyes off of it too long, you lose that momentum. I would like to ask all 5 of our current private lands wildlife biologists to stand up if you would. They told me not to do this, but I would like to recognize them. We have Mr. Justin Folks here who's helping us out with our audio visual this morning. Andy Rosenberger is our longest serving. He's our senior private lands wildlife biologist, and he covers this area, the southwestern part of the state. And David Bryan, he's been on with us for over 2 years. Where's Bob Clinton? I don't see Bob. Okay, well, Bob Clinton is not here at the moment. And Blair Smythe, he's been with us almost a year now. They're doing a super job, and I just would like to give them a round of applause. I've told everyone that if we lose those 5 private lands wildlife biologists, you can say we have a quail plan, but we really don't. There would be no quail plan without them out there on the ground. This has also increased our level of partnership. The Natural Resources Conservation Service and our agencies have always had a good partnership. CMI stands for the Conservation Management Institute. And when we were going through this process, we were not in a position to hire staff. Neither was the NRCS. The Conservation Management Institute stepped up and hired the staff. We have an agreement with them. They are actually employees of the Virginia Tech as special research faculty. And Scott Clocker is here somewhere. Scott, where are you? He is the executive director of the Conservation Management Institute. We want to recognize them for also managing our listservs. They manage all of our listservs associated with this at no charge. So it's great to have partners like that. We have a lot of partners. Virginia Department of Forestry is an outstanding partner. The Wildlife Foundation of Virginia, the State Soil and Water Conservation Districts, Department of Conservation and Recreation, the Forest Service. I know I'm leaving folks out, but the point is it's just a huge partnership, and that's what it has to be. This is how we set up our focus areas, and remember that our plan came out before NBCI 2.0 was finished. So we developed this prior to that time. And our idea was that we would pick areas, and then within those areas where we saw projects starting to develop or where we saw the most interest, we would further target those areas and refine those areas, which I think now we would call those model focus areas. At that time, we didn't have that term. These are some of the major accomplishments of our team. The one that I think is most impressive is the number of site visits that have been made in just 3.5 years. 1,632 site visits. There's only 47,000 farms in the whole state of Virginia. That's 3.5% of that number. So with 5 private lands wildlife biologists, it would take us 28 to 29 years to visit every farm in the state of Virginia. So you double that number and you have the time. And you think about it, if we had 20, we could visit every single farm in the state of Virginia in 7 years. So that's just a point to make. Habitat acres, I don't have this year's numbers in there yet because they're still coming in. But we've done pretty well in some of those target counties. I'm not going to go too much into the nuts and bolts of the funding. I do want to mention the Cooperative Conservation Partnership Initiative. That was a special effort with NRCS, and that's the only time in my career that we've been allowed to work with NRCS and actually focus funds in specific geographic areas. And that brought in another $256,000. So all in all, over the last 3.5 years, we have put about $820,000 worth of habitat on the ground. And the Quail Management Assistance Program, we're a state agency, so we can have focus areas, but you all know this, that does not mean you can ignore the rest of the state. We're a state agency. We have to serve everybody. So we developed the Quail Management Assistance Program to be outreach for every part of the state. We do have focus areas, but we will visit with anybody in the state who's interested in quail. And this just shows that there is widespread interest. Every county that's shaded has some number of QMAP applicants in it. So it's widespread across the state. And we've done outreach. That's another huge factor of momentum. When you think about the fact that now we have an NBCI outreach subcommittee and an outreach staff, and think about the increase in capacity that we've seen in the last 3 years in our own national outreach efforts. So it's critical at that level and at the state level. Mass mailings. This is something, if you're developing a quail plan, our mass mailings have been pretty darn effective. We got the landowner list in all of our focus counties for anyone owning 50 acres or more and did a direct mailing to them and advertised the program. And that's been one of the most effective techniques we've used. We've actually been on television twice, and we were on RFD-TV. I came into the office one morning and I had a phone message, and I called the guy back and he was in Montana. And that's when I realized RFD-TV showed all over the nation. And I told him we'd have somebody out there in about 3 weeks. And we've done a DVD production. That's been another thing we've tried to do. Our DVD was focused towards convincing landowners who were on the fence, putting them over the top and deciding to do quail milling. It's not a how-to video. It's more a why-to. And we've mentioned Jay Howe. We're lucky in Virginia to have the pair of us working together on this, because when it comes to the research and monitoring, if you have one person that's trying to do the habitat side of things and the management side of things and to try to do that, those are two full-time jobs. So we've been very lucky to have an agency that's willing to put that kind of support into the program. NBCI, I don't want to steal any of Don's thunder because I know he's going to talk to us about this, but I think having a strong national presence helps us maintain momentum within our states. NBCI serves a key role, which I think is to unite all these states under one umbrella. It's really only 3 years old with their staffing, and we're really not at full staffing levels yet, so it's still growing. And it is a state initiative. That's one thing we want to remind everybody. The states develop NBCI at the bequest of the directors. And so I do put that little note in there that ultimately I think NBCI's success does depend on the leadership of the agency directors. Also, about NBCI, they push on us some. As a state coordinator, I think you know that NBCI asks us for things. And they push us to do things, and I think they are pushing us to do things that we should have been doing already. Sometimes we push back, but I liken it to having a teacher in high school or a coach that saw something in you and pressed you a little harder than maybe you liked at the time. But you look back on it several years later and you appreciated the fact of what they did, and they were really helping you do what you should have been doing already. And it's kind of like a personal trainer. You know, if folks hire a personal trainer to go to the gym because they're not motivated on their own accord to do that, and if you have a personal trainer, you go and you work out harder. I don't know, maybe that's a bad analogy, Don. Anyway, that's what came to my mind, and I'm glad we have it. Our Quail quilts, that's the term we came up, essentially those are model focus areas. We deemed them Quail quilts because in Virginia the landscape is so fragmented with land ownership patterns that you have anyone from a 15-acre ownership up to 1,000 acres of ownership and everything in between that could compose a focus area. And this just shows an example of where we're starting to see one develop. And some of the places where projects have been somewhat concentrated. That's what our idea of a quail quilt is, but obviously there's a lot of holes in the quilt, and so our goal is to go back and fill those in. Lots of landowner and partner recognition. Recognizing and promoting success is huge, nationally and within the state. So then it comes to the question of why is maintaining momentum so difficult? And there's a lot of different levels of momentum. And first off is the personal momentum of the individual who's leading a program. And if you don't have passion for what you're doing, then I don't know why there would be any reason for anyone else to. It starts with that individual and builds from there. Core team momentum, that is something. You hire good people, you give them what they need, and you get out of their way in a lot of cases. You hire motivated people to begin with. Within agency, momentum is a bigger challenge, and I'll talk about why in a second. Public and landowner momentum. In every place we've had success, it's been because a key local landowner or a key group of local landowners has stepped up and led on their own. They haven't waited for the government to do it. I remember we were having a workshop down in Gloucester County about 2 years ago, and for some reason I made the comment, don't sit and wait around for the government to do it. And this lady in the back jumped up and she said, yeah, don't wait for the daggone government to come and do it. And then everybody in the audience started clapping. Oh my God. What have I done? But they got it. They got it. It takes landowner incentive and momentum. Partner momentum, again, this is huge. We would do nothing without our partners. And national momentum, I would say NBCI and also our non-governmental organizations are key to that. So why do so many quail biologists look like me? And I was looking around, but there's a lot of you that don't look like me, and that's a good thing. But, you know, we have a lot to do. We spend a lot of time doing this. We spend a lot of time doing this, and it's hard to figure out how to streamline that process. But one of the reasons is short-term funding for long-term problems. I think that's one of the biggest challenges we face nationally and within states. It's how do you maintain funding for the long haul? We're going to talk some about Pittman Robertson funding this week for NBTC staff. Until we solve that problem within states and nationally, we're always going to be on a roller coaster ride. I did put a paper in everybody's registration packet. Dr. John Gassett, Mr. Duncan already mentioned, as chair of the NBCI Management Board. He wrote a paper for the Quail 7 conference that I think really outlines a roadmap for recovery of quail. And he asked some very challenging questions in that. I hope everybody will read that, if not here, sometime shortly after leaving here. But I often wonder why don't upland game and non-game birds have the equivalent of what has been done for waterfowl? Well, I know the short answer is they're not migratory, but there's more to it than that. Imagine what we could do if we had a North American Uplands Conservation Act, or a North American Uplands Stamp, or something similar to that. That's what we're essentially trying to do through NBCI, I think, is create the infrastructure necessary to mimic some of the things that have happened in the waterfowl community. And they've even got a show, Duck Dynasty. Happy. Why doesn't quail? Why can't we do that for quail? Overabundance versus underabundance. This is something agencies face. Back in the good old days, everybody was focused on restoring things. But more increasingly, agency staff are focused on dealing with an overabundance of things. We have situations with nuisance wildlife that agencies can't ignore, so the mission has changed. And that's a challenge. You've got to have staff to address all those missions. And unexpected and unavoidable missions. This is a hemorrhagic disease slide, but the chronic wasting disease would be a more appropriate slide. The fact that we do have chronic wasting disease in Virginia now through no fault of our own, and we have to address that. It takes time, it takes staff. Those things come up and they have to be dealt with. So not everybody can drop what they're doing and go work on quail. This is the one, so I hope y'all won't start throwing things at me or telling me to get off the stage. But I think one challenge to maintaining momentum is trying to forget about the things we disagree over and focus on what we agree on. There's lots of controversial issues out there. You know, I've read the San County Almanac at least 6 times. I have page 129 earmarked of Thinking Like a Mountain. I read that at least 2 or 3 times a year. But we live in a modern world. I don't know, what do you tell a landowner who's in an area that's so isolated that they're going to have a difficult time bringing back wild quail in the short term, but they're interested in training bird dogs and keeping that tradition alive? What do we tell them as biologists? It's not a simple answer, I don't think. Also, the property size issues. If you have 10 acres up to 10,000 acres, anybody can do something to benefit quail and other successful species. That doesn't mean that you lie to landowners and tell them they're going to have 10 cubbies on 50 acres. We know that's not going to happen. But they can have a cubby and contribute to the overall recovery. Everybody can be a part of the quail quilt. Translated quail, I won't get into all of these. My point here is that some of these things we need to agree to disagree on and find the things we can agree on and work on those, because we can debate some of these things forever and we're never all going to agree. And I guess the most important thing in my mind is just to never give up. I think I'm preaching to the choir, but I use Dr. Ralph Stanley as an example. How many bluegrass music fans do we have? Pretty good number. He achieved a lot of success late in life. but he persevered through a lot of things. He struggled for years, back making peanuts and traveling up and down the road in old cars, playing for 5 people at a show. But he stuck with it because he loved it. And in 2002, in his mid-70s, he won a Grammy for Best Male Vocalist. He's got an honorary doctorate in music. He was awarded the National Medal of Arts in 2006. And I'm going to go completely corny on you. And I wanted to read a passage from a book called Man of Constant Sorrow. When I read this book, this passage just struck a chord. The road I was driving was the same one where I walked towards Patsy, with my mother riding the side saddle down to the church. I started thinking about Wallace buck dancing to shout "Little Lou." It made me chuckle to myself, remembering how much fun he was having. I doubted I'd ever see such a thing again. Probably never see Wallace again either. When you're as old as me, you never know when's the last time just about anything you're going to see. Me and Wallace were the last of the Mohicans in our little corner of the mountains. We were the last generation to grow up close to the land, when music was something to get you through hard times. It set my mind to thinking about things you don't see anymore, like the chinkapins that used to grow wild up on Smith Ridge. When I was a boy, there was chinkapin bushes all around these parts. One of the first tunes my mother taught me on the banjo was the old mountain song Chinkapin Honey. Around where I lived, though, you didn't have to hunt for them because they was everywhere. They were little round black nuts, something like a chestnut, but smaller and sweeter. At the end was something like a bird. You could bite into them, and they were a real treat. They were a taste of heaven for a couple of brothers who had to forage for food many a time when we were hungry on our way to school. I remember Carter and me roaming the hillsides, picking chinkapins and gobbling handfuls down like they were going out of style. And don't you know they did? Sometime or the other, chinkapins just died out for some reason or another. And there ain't a one left on the ridge or hereabouts that I've seen or heard about for years. You just can't find chinkapins anywhere. One day they were as thick as huckleberries. And the next thing you know, they were all gone like they never was. That's something that will set you thinking. So I just drove on through the night down the Ralph Stanley Highway, heading home after another show, thinking about chinkapins and some other things that ain't no more. And I hope that never becomes Quail.